I haven't spoken to you since Donald Trump was reelected,
Hmm.
and we need guidance. I think my new sort of tack on this new world order is what are we building? What are we building, right? And I think that's a really good question, but I there is a lot to say. I don't I'm there's a lot of places to start, but I guess maybe I haven't heard your postmortems of the 2024 election. Um, what is it that you're walking away with that still is sticking with you, especially when it comes to the Democratic Party, maybe?
Well, first, again, thank you for having me back. Actually, the first thing I would say is that I actually think that too many people were jumping to too many conclusions very quickly about what happened on November 5th.
Mm,
And those conclusions were often very one dimensional. Um, this was the closest election, what, in US history? Um, a, 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 a difference in vote that was less than the Biden victory in 2020.
right.
And so it would not be beyond belief that you and I could have been having a very different conversation. Um, so one thing is that people have to calm down and like look at the situation on multiple levels. So, for instance, I was very unsettled by Bernie Sanders' comments right after the election that
Mm,
were very much like his comments after the 2016 election, where he basically said a populist economic message would have basically brought about victory for the
right.
Democrats.
Right.
And again, it's like, no, brother. I mean, did you watch Madison Square Garden? I mean, it's not just about economics.
Yeah.
Um, I think one of the things that I have not heard almost anyone talk about is what I call the COVID PTSD that this
Mm,
country has gone through. Um, I mean, in all honesty, I think that millions of people were so freaked by the COVID experience, the pandemic and the economic collapse, that they just wanted it done. They just wanted it done. Let us get beyond it. Um, but the other thing is that, to me, the discussions about inflation
mhm.
as a main factor in sort of driving people to vote for Trump, I thought that was ridiculous. But I also thought that what was being missed was that when I was in high school, in the science classes, they would you'd learn about supersaturation. So
Mhm.
you get the water and you stir the salt in and it dissolves. And then you put some more salt in and you keep intensely stirring it and it dissolves. And then all of a sudden, like if you drop 1 grain of salt into the water, all of the salt that was dissolved fell to the bottom.
Mhm.
That to me is what happened as a result of the COVID experience. That 40 plus years of neoliberalism, the crunch on people's lives miserable and stagnating. It wasn't just about what happened then, even though there was a global phenomena that was happening to political parties that were in office during the pandemic. But it was like the COVID experience and economic collapse was that grain of salt that just brought everything down. And that is what Harris couldn't or wouldn't speak to.
Mm,
That it wasn't just that the inflation and the cost of gas and eggs, and it wasn't enough to talk about the economy improving, which it was. You had to speak to the fact that people have been living with a declining living standard since the 70s. And you've got to speak to that.
Yeah.
And we've got to be clear as to who is behind that,
Yeah.
who is not.
To that point, first of all, I do think COVID was, I think that's a really important point. I want to put that in aside 1 second, but to the point of Bernie Sanders and his immediate postmortems, I gotta say, I agree with the critique, especially as someone who watched, I think as we all did, Bernie Sanders go real easy on Joe Biden, who he was
Right.
running against, and because he was ultimately his friend, and they had both been in the Senate, and they were just, and it's like, no, but, and again, I don't think it's
Mhm.
sexist or racist, but it is interesting that he was very eagerly able to say that about Kamala Harris's
Agree.
campaign, but then wasn't able to say that about Joe Biden's campaign. Man, it's the same campaign.
That's
Okay,
right.
so and so
I
I just
thought the
wanted,
same thing. I agree.
yeah, man. I'm like, what about your buddy who you handed the nomination to because you didn't want to actually attack him in the way that you attacked Hillary Clinton? And I love Bernie, but I do think the thing that he was right about in the postmortem was something you just said, which is name the enemy.
Right.
Donald Trump is able to name his fabricated enemies when, and it gives people a narrative. Everyone's searching for meaning and conspiracy theories. COVID really again brought that out in everyone. But when you can name the 1%, when you can name corporate greed, and you can give a framework for all the chaos that it seems that you're living in, which is actually a correct framework,
That's right.
it is very galvanizing, and it gives something for people to fight for and against.
I agree 150%. And I see, I was listening to the end of your last interview, and there were two things that I wanted to say actually as
Yeah.
a result.
Yeah.
One was a sort of minor thing,
Sure.
which is I never criticized the way Biden speaks, in
Mhm.
part because he was a stutterer
Mhm.
and he's lived with that, right? So I just want to offer that as a little bit of a caution. But I thought that you were right about his his administration was not the quintessential neoliberal administration. It
Right.
definitely was not.
Yeah.
But, and here's the big qualification, and as you pointed out, and I want to echo this, that it was sort of it was like his failure to repudiate the past, not simply do something different, but actually repudiate the past and acknowledge, no, you know what, we screwed up.
Yes.
And there really needs to be a different path, and his unwillingness to do that, as well as something that a couple of commentators have pointed out about the unwillingness of his administration to go on the offense after the 2022 midterm elections, when the Republicans took over the House and they started trying to roll everything back
Yep.
and letting various legislation expire. That was the key time when Biden and Harris should have been out in the fields, really just waving the sword and demanding a fight back, and they didn't.
He started to go around and remind people of the investments that the Inflation Reduction Act had done. It was when he began campaigning, but it was so clear that the guy didn't have the gas. And then of course
That's
you
right.
you kept the shortest leash on your vice president possible, and then all of a sudden now she's going to run in, with 4 months.
I
It's,
agree.
or 3, you're just like, yeah, that's a reason to not keep a short leash on someone. If you're actually a transitional candidate, you have to prime your successor better than you did. But yeah, and I think that's really important. Like I'm always looking at, other countries and how, their new leaders have broken out. And you look at
Mhm.
Nayib Bukele in El Salvador.
Mhm.
And one of the things that he was able to break out, the reason he was able to break out in the way he did was because he came from, I think, not the Arena party, the other party, whatever. He came from like the basic liberal party,
Mhm.
came up through the ranks, and then was like, nah, I forsake them. They suck. The right wing party sucks. I'm something new. And like, we have to understand that the world over, people are sick of often a duopoly or a three parties, two parties, one main party. And they love candidates that can either be independent or say, just like Bernie did, like the Democrats have been on this, we need to get back to the days of FDR, stop with the neoliberal economics train, stop with the war and militarism train. And that gets you so much cred
That's right.
in this day and age when there is such a crisis of legitimacy. But Bill, how are you feeling about the Democratic Party? I don't know. I don't even really care about the DNC chair fight because I'm like, I don't even know. Obviously, pragmatically, this might have to be the vehicle against Trump. But if they are not willing to run someone who can make a break with past Democratic, policies and the Clintonisms of it all, then what are we doing? We know we can't win. So how are you feeling about the Democratic Party?
Sort of the way I always do, which is that it's a battlefield, and that's it. It's not a party; it's an alliance, and so everything depends ultimately on whether we get our forces together in an organized way and go beyond the candidate.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not disagreeing with you on the importance of candidates. What I'm saying is that we need more cohesive organization among progressive forces that are operating within the Democratic Party, whether it's the Justice Democrats, the Working Families Party, whoever, with a real plan.
Yep.
I mean, I was joking with people. I said, I'm going to run to be the chair of the DNC. It's like we need people
I would be there for that.
I appreciate that. I mean, I think we need, as you're saying, to shake things up.
Yeah.
What we need organization, not just good speeches. And this was part of the problem back in 89, after the 88 election with the Rainbow Coalition and Jesse Jackson, that instead of building an organization that really could have been pushing around the country, raising hell, running primaries, etc., it became his personal organization, and then it essentially collapsed.
Right.
Bernie had an opportunity after 2016. They started our revolution, but Bernie's not really an organization builder.
No.
And so what we need is
which is interesting. It's interesting for someone who's got such an organizing background, but then you realize, he's been a politician longer than he's been an organizer.
Absolutely.
And it's always, I think maybe once a week, it sort of like wakes me up in the night that like, why, I mean, the DSA is sort of maybe the vehicle that many people, Bernie organizers, funneled into, but how and why did we not create lasting structures coming out of the Bernie movement that could take us into this fight? And it feels, it's funny because it does actually feel very selfish of Bernie, but I also understand it's like, he probably thinks it's not selfish to do something like that, but it's like, no, it actually, like, it can't just be about you. It is about so much more. And so, I mean, there has to be the outside pressure here. There has to be movement pressure, and there just isn't. I mean, I still don't feel comfortable in saying that there even is a left in this country. I don't know if there really is an organized left here.
There's I would say there's a fragmented left, but I want to go back to something else about that you were raising. You see, it seems to me that as long as I've known of Sanders, he's never been an organization builder. He has been a political figure, an iconic one, but he's never been an organization builder. I remember back in the late 80s, before he ran for Congress, after he had stepped down as mayor of Burlington, I met with him. I had lunch with him in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I was developing a project, and I was And the project was aimed at building a sort of post-rainbow, essentially.
Okay. Uh-huh.
And I thought Sanders would be ideal for this.
Yeah.
Couldn't get him. Just could. I mean, that was just not where he was thinking. He was thinking more in terms of whether he should run for Congress and then ultimately for the Senate.
Right.
See, I think that what we need, there's a partnership that exists between any good leader and someone who is the organization builder.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, for example, in history, there was in the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, when A. Philip Randolph was the president, most people only think of Randolph. But it was his second in command, whose name is escaping me right now, who woke up every morning to make sure that the locals were working, that the organization was building.
Right.
Randolph had the big vision, but if you don't have that second person and you don't give them the authority to actually do this,
Yep.
it won't work. And this is the problem. So, like, there's many good leaders who are just simply not good organization builders.
Yeah.
We need both right now.
Can I ask you about labor? I'm seeing some, Marcos Granger says, general strike 2028, everyone's looking to labor, and it's, a hard time to look to labor because you see Trump is now president, and he's, he yesterday in his inaugural speech talked about working people. Oh, the auto workers, never once mentioned unions, never once mentioned the UAW.
Doesn't believe them.
Because he doesn't exactly. So, just a total boss move. I mean, real captive audience meeting we had there yesterday. But where are your thoughts on labor and leaders and people like Sean Fain, even Sean O'Brien, who I'm willing to forgive? That was an interesting move for him. I saw him get interviewed recently, and I'm like, all right, he's still got the workers back. But where are you at with? A lot of people are like, nah, labor is the way right now.
Well, labor is one of the ways, but it's interesting. So this is the way I look at where organized labor is right now in the face of Trump.
Yeah.
There's going to be three tendencies. We already see them. There are the conciliators or collaborators. That's O'Brien and Daggett at the ILA, International Longshoremen's Association. Then there is the ostrich strategy, which is put your head in the ground and hope that you have your ass in 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the resistors.
Mm-hmm.
And I think among the resistors, there will be unions like SEIU, Unite Here, the Painters, a few others, NNU, National Nurses United.
Yeah.
And I think the UAW will be there, although I have to say I was disappointed by an op-ed that Sean Fain wrote yesterday that was in the Washington Post, where he basically was saying that although the UAW disagrees with most of what Trump is espousing, we essentially have to look for common ground.
Sure.
I don't look for common ground with fascists.
Yeah.
I mean, like tactically.
But also the bosses. I mean, this is the boss class,
This is the boss class. And see, when you were making reference to when Trump said about the auto workers, what he was talking about were both non-union auto workers that he grabbed, as well as there were a segment of the UAW that were pro-Trump. But the leadership of the UAW was not pro-Trump and had a very good critique of Trump. I mean, this is a guy who's a strike breaker, but he is not just a strike breaker. He is someone who is fundamentally a deal maker. So, for instance, the strike that was the pending strike on the East Coast docks, it got settled. Now, the president of the ILA, this guy Daggett, basically thanks Trump. And I'm saying, well, wait a minute, man. Only a couple of months ago, when you all went on strike, Biden was out there for you and Harris was out there for you. Where is your thanks to them? Which led me to think something strange is going on here. But again, there's a certain kind of transactional way that he thinks. My argument right now, part of what I'm doing is a project called Standing for Democracy, which is an anti-fascist worker project. And we believe that the union movement has to be an anti-fascist movement. That this is not about partisanship in a traditional sense. This is about taking a stand, taking the right stand.
Yeah.
And not thinking that we can play footsie with the fascists. They are not intending to have that kind of relationship with us.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're probably responding to some people in their membership, right? Like that's what's afoot
Yes.
is. So I think it's really awesome, this initiative, because it is like the political education, the other ways that unions can offer this political home for members, to deepen their thinking, not just about their own workplace, but about politics. And again, fascism is really important. And also, I think we have to consistently point out what a strike breaker he is. How Trump then bragged about using H-1B visas all the time, and also bragged about we know there are undocumented people and immigrants who've worked with him, which is, again, how do we say this in a way that brings us together rather than fractures us and sort of, again, pits us against, engineers who come from abroad, or, migrant workers and whatnot. Because I really think as these mass detentions happen, as the deportations happen, what that will mean for the economy in terms of workers is a lot. And so you're not going to get people to fill these jobs if you're making them even more precarious. So how can unions play this role without doing what I think historically has happened in unions, which is, pitting certain workers against others based on, what language they speak, color of their skin, on and on.
Well, the basic approach actually of the old industrial workers of the world, which was every worker should be unionized. Irrespective of race, sex, whatever, every worker should be unionized, and that it's not our job to do a check on someone's citizenship or anything else for that matter. If they're working with us, if they are in the industry, they are to be unionized. We need to build them as fellow union members, as comrades.
Yes.
And that's the approach that we need to take right now, because I was reading something from Robin Kelly the other day, very important piece where he was emphasizing the importance of rebuilding solidarity, the sense of solidarity. And part of what has happened as unions have weakened is that sense of solidarity has fractured, and everyone feels like ultimately they're on their own.
Yeah.
And they could be working in a factory, or they could be doing any number of other things. They're on their own. Unions have to restore that sense that, no, you're not on your own. We're in this one together. And that, I think, is going to be central to fighting the far right.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's the whole thing about the capitulation and the collaborators. That
That's
collaboration always comes with, strings attached. And it usually is, here's who you're going to have to cut out from your equation. Here are the people you're going to have to sell down the river. Here are the people you will have to, ice out of the movement and sacrifice in order to appease MAGA. Usually, we've seen it. Trans people, immigrants, these are the people you're going to have to sacrifice. And the answer obviously is absolutely not. And solidarity is the way forward. And I do think there has to be an economic populist agenda, but I bristle, and everybody who watches the show knows, at this knee-jerk class reductionism that anyone who thinks these things, remember Nancy Pelosi, after Hillary Clinton lost in 2016, said she should stop talking. She should have stopped talking about how much she would be the first female president. Stop talking about being a woman, i.e., some leftists have a lot in common with centrists. Don't
Oh
get it
yeah.
twisted. It's a centrist line to be only class reduction. I mean, Nancy Pelosi's not class reductionist. She's just saying that because it's easy to sell X, Y, or Z, half the population of women down the river.
Mhm.
I mean,
No,
we're
exactly.
in a time when people are talking about working with these motherfuckers, and I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. Can women not access abortion? Are women bleeding out in their cars right now? Yes. Well, talk to me when that stops happening, and then maybe I'll entertain your little like populist venture with these fascists. I'm sorry. I can't.
No, I'm with you. I mean, it's like, yes, amen, absolutely, that is right. And not enough people are saying that, and they're falling back into this. If we only just had a better economic message, or I mean, I'm leaving aside people like Rahm Emanuel with their messages, but on the progressive side, this idea, and it's like, no, we got to go deeper, and we've got to deal with why Madison Square Garden didn't tip the election against Trump. Why, when people actually saw everything that was there, how could they possibly have concluded that this was the future of the United States? And you know, one of the things I said to some people, and they didn't respond. I said, you know, when I hear some of this about the economic stuff, I think about this. If a black guy had been running for president and a white woman had been his opponent, and the black guy had called the white woman a whore, what is the likelihood that that person would have won an election, let alone gotten out alive out of a, you know what I mean? And I said, so then it's really more, don't tell me that it's like people really think about the economy and they're letting this stuff fall aside. It's not that important, because actually it is important. Yes. Millions of people were not simply willing to accept this. They embraced this.
Yeah. And I think it's this, you know, this like, you know, disease we have in American psyche of like, I'm not a billionaire now, but I'm gonna be a billionaire.
That's right.
Think John Oliver said, like, it's like a nation of people who think they're on the cusp of being Donald Trump. And through Trump, you sort of put all your id of like, he can get away with it. He can be a convicted rapist. He can be a fraud. He can be, you know, commit all these kinds of crimes. And man, if only he can get away with these jokes, and if only, you know, I could, and all I have to do is sell my community and my family down the river, and then maybe me too. And again, I think COVID, to your original point, really turbocharged this kind of get out alive mentality of like, you know, I felt I at once felt solidarity, but I gotta say, because of the social distancing, it was fractious. I did feel like at that point I was like, I'd like to start a family. That's definitely, I was like, I want to start a family. I want to like that's what mattered to me, was like the people near to me mattered to me. I think some people saw that and were like, yeah, the people near to me matter to me, and everyone else is an evil zombie, and everyone else is a, you know, a groomer. It's like, it primed our brains for, you know, to be antagonistic towards one another and to be really tribal. I mean, the tribalism, I guess that's the word I'm looking for. And everything about COVID proved Bernie Sanders right. We need a public health, you know, healthcare system. Government has a role to play. It can be a good role to play. And it's like, if Biden had continued those things, yes, we knew the vaccine wasn't popular. Don't talk about the vaccine. That's fine. But like, talk about what COVID proved, how it showed America's whole ass to itself, and move forward with that. Government has a role to play. You can't allow, we can't hollow it out. These corporations can't be our bosses. We're our bosses. Like, the people are our bosses, on and on and on. Anyway, Ukraine, lastly,
yes.
Bill, anything about Ukraine? Obviously, apparently there's been no discussions really between at least Biden, Trump and Putin. I mean, we know Zelensky was even like meeting with Trump in the campaign. Again, same sort of hedging your bets. Trump team has said they would like to allow Russia to hold on to Crimea, and the 4 Ukrainian regions that have been annexed since. Where do you, from your reading and assessment, what do you think is bound to play out? Obviously, we know Biden has greenlit a bunch of weapons to Ukraine in some of these final acts, but yeah.
Unfortunately, I think that there will be some sort of land for peace arrangement.
Yeah.
Unless there's a mutiny in the Russian army, which is not impossible. I mean, the fact that they brought the North Koreans in, I thought was really interesting. But I tend to think that Trump is going to try, but he may not succeed. But I think he's going to try to work out some sort of land for peace deal between them. And the problem is that it's like there may be peace in there for now, but the anger that is going to be brewing in Ukraine might at some point come back in a very, very ugly form. In other words, war could conceivably break out again when Ukraine feels stronger. And who knows? I mean, they could develop their own nuclear weapons again.
Or when Putin decides that he wants more land. I mean,
that's right.
Putin wants Kyiv. Like, it's like, if we've learned nothing, it's that Putin will eventually continue to encroach on Ukraine and get more and more land. He's not going to be satisfied. I mean, I'm someone who wants to see some sort of peace agreement and all that, but we're going to talk more about that on this show in the coming months. So,
good.
But I appreciate your work and especially, sort of imbuing the left with some of this wisdom and knowledge around Ukraine as well is important. What's going on, Frantifa? If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that button. And also, you can become a patron and support the show every single week. Get access to bonus episodes and exclusive merchandise. Patreon.com/Bitchuation Room. Do it.